My name is Bryan J. Baptiste. J stands for James. Um, Born of Anthony C. Baptiste Jr. and Eva Gomez. I have Portuguese lines on both sides of the family, traced back to, I think, Cape Verde Islands and the Azores. And other than that, that's what I know. My grandparent, on my grandfather's side, he came here as an immigrant, and my grandmother was actually already third generation Portuguese woman. My grandfather owned a dairy in Omau, and
So when you came to like beginning of 20th century, like
I don't even know the exact date. I haven't really looked at the exact date of when it was. All my grandparents died before I was born, because I'm a Rotund crop. I have my dad was 45 already when I was born, and so all my grandparents except my Portuguese grandmother, which was a Nobrega family, died before I was born. So you have the Baptiste family, the Nobrega family, and on my mother's side you have a Resentes family as well, mixed in a little bit with Portuguese. A little bit with Hawaiian, Chinese, and French. Well, when I was born, my dad was chairman of the board of supervisors for the island, which is equivalent to being mayor at that time. My childhood was not a normal one necessarily, in that most of my relationship with my parents were at various functions and those kind of things. My dad also, he had the U.S. postal contract during World War II, and so started a trucking business. He also ran all the school bus system for the island. At that time, all the kids went to school by truck. So as far as the Portuguese heritage per se, it wasn't where we had. It crossed all ethnicities. It wasn't heavily Portuguese background, because my dad had to deal with all the nationalities. As far as the Portuguese, some of the things in my youth were some of the plantation softball teams. I used to play plantation against plantation, and the Portuguese used to have some teams as well. Aunties and uncles, I remember them cooking in the brick ovens and cooking the breads and making their soups and different things. My grandparents, according to my understanding, again were farmers, so they had a dairy and they raised all their own food and all those kind of things, and made Portuguese dishes. But again, like I say, it was before I was born, so these are just stories passed on to me. Other than that, with my mother's side of the family, we always had certain kinds of foods at home. Every so often they were Portuguese, but our house was more cosmopolitan, I think, than Portuguese. Well, he was involved at a time where actually the working people had a real hard time, and so he was mayor during the Democratic, or chairman during the Democratic Revolution in 1954. And prior to that, he was very strong with the unions and being an advocate for the working person. And so I think in his work going from town to town, either through carrying people on the buses or the kids, or carrying the mail, the mailman of those days kind of got to see the whole island as a total, and probably got a better perspective than most or earfuls from most on what people thought was needed on the island. And so I think from those experiences and his exposure to the different towns, it made him a very viable candidate. So he was on the Board of Supervisors, I believe, for 6 years, chairman of the board for 12, and then in the State House for 2 years. Although being in a position like this is like being in a fishbowl, and there's always criticisms and things like that, it's also a place where you can make changes for the betterment of your island and changes to the systemic way we do things within government. You can't change. It's very difficult to change from outside. You have to be in here. So in a way, it's a sacrifice to be in the position and to put your nose to the grindstone and keep focused and make small changes as we go along. That's what kind of motivated me to run in the first place, is the ability to be in a place to be able to change things. Well, in the past we had a Portuguese Chamber of Commerce, I believe, or a Portuguese Cultural Society. That died out probably about 15 years ago. The Portuguese and their relations now are, most of it is through the Catholic Church and the various organizations, women's and men's, that are within the structure of the church. Geographically, like in all the islands, there are certain towns that have heavier concentrations of Portuguese than others, with Kalaheo on this island having a large population of Portuguese. And that's basically because Portuguese were basically agronomic in farming or ranching or those kind of professions. And so you see, heavier concentrations in the more mountain-based arenas. And I think that carries through on all the islands, whether you're on Makawao, on Maui, or I'm not sure which is the Portuguese communities on the Big Island, but they were more ranchers and herders, and so not as much fishermen as the rest. Well, I think the Portuguese need to make a more concerted effort on retaining the culture. It's very easy, being a Caucasian of Caucasian ancestry, whether it be Portuguese, to kind of blend into the larger Caucasian population. We need to make a concerted effort to recognize our roots and what we're all about, and take pride in those roots, similar to how the Filipino community does, or the Japanese community, and create a more definitive effort, I think, to establish that, to pass on. Because I think as society gets more modern and the world gets smaller, we have less and less chance to keep a separate identity from a larger population base. The plantations went through various cycles or waves of migration, and the Portuguese were fortunate enough to be some of the earliest migrants, so naturally they elevated to the Luna status or supervisory status. The plantation, we have one left on the island, which is Gay and Robinson. And I think one of two, because Maui has the other one that's left. There are many people who still live today in housing that's provided by the plantations, both in Pakala and Kamakani, and still depend on the plantations to provide them that social infrastructure. I think that's slowly dwindling away as sugar becomes less and less viable on the world market. But I'm hoping as the last remaining two plantations transform a bit, that they still keep some of the plantation culture and history and traditions together. The plantation camps really offered a microcosm of humanity and how people of different cultures could blend in. You know, as you went along, you went from the Caucasian to a more specialized Portuguese to Chinese to Japanese to Filipino, or you know, and it went in that route. So it set up the social stratus of our heritage and how things were. And as people climbed up the plantation ladder, they also spread into the community as leaders as well. And I think that's how my dad and many of his generation got involved. Hannibal Tavares on Maui with the Sugar Planters Association. You know, there have been many Portuguese leaders across the state. So I think, you know, it's the timing of migration and the natural elevation in status as people worked through experience with the plantations caused this all to happen. And there's actually a number of camps out there, like I said, where you were was Kamakani, which is the one with the lampposts that you go down to the plantation, and then next to it is Kamakani also, that's in front of the store there and Thrifty Mart. And then you have Pakala, which is further west. Wait, is it further west? Yeah, I believe it's further east. You have Pakala, which is also still inhabited. You also have a smaller subdivision across the highway, which I believe is called Camp 6. And so that's on the Mauka side that has residents still there as well.
Those are the people still working the plantation?
Yeah, people still working the plantations.
So the plantation history is still alive here in
Oh yeah, it's still alive there. It's still a vital part, I believe, of our culture. As the houses get older and profits from the plantation get less and less, it becomes more and more difficult for the plantation to keep the housing viable. You know, it's hard to imagine a single corporation being able to house that many people, all their employees. But you've seen camps over the years since I've been born disappear. Now there's nothing there. And so it's a storied history of people coming to America for a better life, working very hard, just coming together to share culture, language, food, the whole works. And so to me, it was a point that I'd love to be able to get back to, where you have communities that all know each other and are comfortable in sharing resources, and creates that bond where adults look over the kids and the other generations and extend their circle of concern over and above their immediate family. And so they reach out As I used to tell my friends, if you started at the top of Kalaheo at Pu'uvai Drive and you did something wrong, by the time you got to the bottom, somebody would be there to stop you, because whether you call it Portuguese wireless or whether you call it just good, strong community, everybody cared enough to take notice and show concern. There was no state that had such a multitude of migration, at least in the last 100 years, of so many different cultures, so many different ethnicities. And in many places on the mainland, when people migrate, they come into an area of a state and they all congregate all together. And so here you had Portuguese camps and Japanese camps and Filipino camps, but they were all really forced to come to a central meeting point through work and through the social activities that took place. And that's what causes it to be different from any of other places that we know. I'm proud of my Portuguese heritage. A lot of times we're the butt of various jokes or whatever the case may be. There's also many things we as a culture can be very proud of in what we've been able to achieve and how we've been able to take on leadership positions in all of government and industry. And so, I wish I could only have met and known my grandparents more than I have, and gotten to know a little more of what was back there. And I think that's what's important. I'm glad you're doing this because this, at least for those at some point where the modern world tends to gobble us up into one mass, will still give people a way to look at the differences and how we got from point A to point Z and some of the steps in between.
My name is Betty Ventura, and I was born here on Maui, on the little town of Paia.
Well, I was born here on Maui also, born in the town of Kiakea.
And your name?
Arthur Ventura.
I grew up in the little town of Hamakuapoko, which would say, cut it short, would say H Poko, and we grew up amongst people of different cultures. There were Filipinos, Portuguese, Japanese, Puerto Ricans, and we grew up playing together, going to school together, eating together as a group, and our relationship with one another was very unique because we blended real well. We did not look at each other as a person of a race, but as a person of a good person. And life in the plantation was very simple because we didn't have the things that we have today, but yet it was good living. There was a lot of love, and you never would have too much problems with maybe children stealing from one another or fighting, because everybody was a family, regardless if you were of a different race. So life in our times when I was growing up was beautiful.
Well, my name is Arthur Ventura. I was born and raised on a ranch. And the people we dealt with, the cowboys, were mostly Hawaiians. So I'm more sort of a Hawaiian Portuguese. Until I got into the service, that's all I did. Ranching, that's all I knew. After that, well, became a maintenance man for the state, got married to this beautiful lady here. I have 2 sons, 3 grandchildren, and 2 daughter-in-laws. All wonderful people, different mixtures, but we love them all.
As you know, we have this beautiful church, Holy Ghost Church. It's a replica of one of the churches that is built in the Azores. And our church was going to be either closed because of it was termite eaten. So, Father, at the time, we had a choice either to renovate it, restore it rather, or to close it. So the parishioners all agreed to restore it. And that means that we'd had to give about a good sum of money. It would cost about $1 million over. So one day at Mass, I got this inspiration and I followed it through. And it said that you could give Father for the church more than $5 or $10 a week if you were to make bread. So I followed my feelings and I got a recipe and I got people to follow me doing this bread. And well, as the years went by, we got together and we worked harmoniously, and we made over $460,000. But after everything was all said and done and finished, I moved on to another project. And when I moved, I took my recipe with me, and then I went to the school that I grew up and was raised, went to school at, and that's St. Anthony's School. And there I got a group of women and men interested, and we are now doing the bread there. And for the children of the island who wishes to attend St. Anthony High School, a project is the financial assistance program. And so far up until now, we have made over $30,000, and we're still going. Now, as you know, bread has almost the same ingredients. Well, when I first started to make this bread, I came home from Mass and I looked for a recipe. And then there was this recipe that I had gotten, I don't know from where. And on this recipe, I had written, after I made it, this bread is ono, 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 which in Hawaiian means very good. Why did I write that? I don't know. But God knew what He had in mind, because He knew down the road, years down the road, I would come back to that same recipe. But when I looked at the recipe and I said, well, I'll try this bread, but yet this bread didn't taste like the bread that my grandmother did. And like I said, all recipes, bread recipes have almost the same ingredients. So I played with this recipe until I got the taste of my grandmother. And I don't know if you understand when I say the taste, but as growing up as a child, you have the taste of the different foods that your parents or your grandparents made. And so this ingredient that I put in, I said, wow, I can almost feel myself in my grandmother's kitchen. And so I stayed with that recipe. And if I needed to have any more, maybe the recipe, sometimes the bread didn't come too good, I'd go to the person that I knew who knew where the mistake was. I would go to the Lord. And He would inspire me in a way that I would do. And then I got the recipe in such exact amounts that now, with all pride, but yet I give thanks to God first, that I have made this bread to be a bread that most of the people here on Maui are going to the store for. And so with that, I have to give a smile on my face, and I thank God for inspiring me in that fashion. But otherwise, I would not have been able to do it.
Hey, you bugger, what you doing? In other words, just, hey, you, what are you going to do? Yeah. Like in Japanese, if you turn around, hey, you bakatari means like, you're kidding me. Yeah, you bakatari. That's all it means. Eh? So we pick up all the different words. Filipino, you say, "Hey, where you going?"
O manang.
Oi. See, in other words, hey, oi.
Okay, say something in Hawaiian
Hmm?
that you would say.
Well, like if I'm going to ask you in Hawaiian, if I'm going to ask, where are you going? I'm going to say, pehe oi. You turn around, you answer me back in Hawaiian, you say, ahele kahale. I'm going home.
So you speak Hawaiian also?
Not fluently, but like in Portuguese, I'll pick up words and I can say a few words. In Filipino, you pick up a few words. Then you can tell them back. See, I say, tell them. That's just a slang we use. Tell him or tell you. We say, tell him.
Yeah, that's
That's
using
pigeon.
pigeon.
Mm.
First of all, I'm Portuguese by race, by birth. But because I was born and raised here on the islands, I became, and I would identify myself as American Portuguese. I'm not a product of, per se, of the island of Portugal because I I don't know how to speak the language. For me to speak the language, I would have to go to school and learn it. So I'm more of a product of here in the. I'm a product of where I grew up, and even though it is Hawaii, it's America, and I love this country, and I love going back to Portugal to see where my roots are from. It makes me feel good, but my roots here, when you talk about roots now, my roots here is here. The roots of my grandparents were in Portugal, and I'm a product of that. And this is the reason why they came to America, was to give to their children and their children's children down the line a better way of life. So for that, I have to say I am an American Portuguese. Well, the same thing will happen to all of the other races. We are going to be a combination of races where you will not be able to find a person of pure. But that is not what God has intended for us to be. He made everybody. He made you Portuguese. He made me Portuguese. He made it. But in the same process, he created everybody. And he knew down the line that we would all have to blend together. And if I was to tell you that being Portuguese is better than being Japanese, right here in my own family, I have a half Japanese grandson. How will I treat them? I have to look at them as one of God's children. And I don't look at them as a race. And I don't think we here on this planet Earth should look at each other as a race, because they're good people in every race. So the Portuguese people, like I say, unless you are determined to say, well, I am better than you, then you're going to seek out a person of the same race. Not necessarily meaning that that person is the person for you. But I don't see a race of just pure Portuguese down the road. And like if you were to look at other people, you're going to find that they have a mixture of different races. So how can you extract? How can I extract the Japanese out of my grandson? I cannot do that. And 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 like I said, I look at them. I don't see Japanese Ryan or Japanese uh, Aaron or Hawaiian Kalani. I see them as my children. And so this is how we live. And this is how I portray how the Portuguese people will be, a mixture of a lot of races. Beautiful races. Because you see the pictures, they look beautiful, handsome children. Look at my daughter-in-law, isn't she a beautiful girl? Yeah.